Hello and welcome back. Here's my other story. Yay. So, I come home from the hospital on Monday, March 30th, and Wednesday, April 1st, my head starts leaking. So, my mom calls the hospital and speaks to a nurse, and the nurse says that it's probably fine because it's normal for an incision to leak right after surgery, but just keep an eye on it. So, we do keep an eye on it, and it just keeps on leaking. I would wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and my pillow is all wet from the leakage. I ended up sleeping on a towel because there was so much wetness. I had my staples removed on April 14th, just over 2 weeks after the surgery. My mom was able to come into this appointment, thankfully, and we ended up telling the nurse removing them that there was leakage this whole time. You know, we tell her that before she removes them, and when she is removing them, they started leaking, so she ended up grabbing another nurse to, double check, because she's a little concerned about it. But the other nurse says that it's probably okay, and just let it scab over and heal, and it should be okay. So it scabs, it heals, and I think I'm okay. But then I feel something wet on my neck, and I asked my mom if I'm leaking, and I was. I ended up having to go to visual therapy all the time because the stroke affected my eyes very bad. So at one of the appointments, I was leaking. So I called the hospital to see if I could get in that day, since it was only 10-15 minutes away from where I had visual therapy. And they said I could go in, but I had to go in by myself. Just great, right? No. So they get me in, give me some antibiotics, had to take 2 a day for a week, and then only let them know if it gets worse. So I take them for about 2 days, and then pus started coming out of the leakage spot. So my dad thinks that it might just be the infection clearing itself out, so we just leave it alone for a couple hours, but I ended up wearing a bandana so that I wouldn't have to hold the Kleenex to it nonstop, because really, I only have 1.5 hands. This hand doesn't work very well. Yeah, I didn't want to hold on to it with one hand, not have very good control over it, and then hold on to it with the other hand. That's my good hand now. Yeah, it wasn't gonna work out for me. So I just put a bandana on with Kleenex under it to, hold it in place. So we ended up calling the hospital because it was just obnoxious how much was coming out. It was coming out like a pulsing rate. It was just gross and bad and not good. So the ER doctor told me that she would rather have me come in and find out that it's nothing versus not come in and then something seriously wrong. So she tells us on the phone that if I need to have surgery, it would either be emergency surgery that evening and I would go home the next day, or I would have it in the morning and go home that afternoon. So I pack a little overnight bag thinking that I'll only be there for one night. I wasn't. So I go into the ER May 2nd, and I'm able to check in with my mom, but she has to leave right after, since I'm an adult. I'm over 18. It's dumb. Dumb rules, but whatever. So I get into a room, and the doctor looks at my head, and she can automatically see that there's an infection, but she orders a CT scan to double check. The CT scan comes back showing that there is indeed an infection, so they hook up an IV to start some antibiotics. And so at this point, it's 6 or 7 p.m., and she had told me not to eat anything before coming in case I needed surgery right away. And since I didn't, the nurse there ended up making me a PB&J sandwich and gave me a Gatorade, and I was like, food never tasted so good. So being in the hospital this time really wasn't too scary because, I felt like a pro being there before, all alone. I'm told that my surgery would be at about 8, and, don't eat or drink anything after midnight. So 8:15ish comes, and I'm told it'll be 10. Then 10ish comes, and I'm told it'll be 10:30. Then 11. Then 11:45. Anyway, I didn't end up having surgery until about 1:30 in the afternoon. I'm starving. I can hear nurses talking about going on their lunch break, and I'm like, I just want food. Yeah, I was hungry. Anyway, so I finally go into my surgery. They apologize, saying that there's been a whole bunch of surgeries, emergency surgeries that day. So, I understand, but I'm still irritated because I'm starving. I'm told I'm gonna have surgery at 8 a.m. Like, no, I'm hungry. But aloud, I'm like, oh, that's okay, that's fine, I understand. But, my mind was not happy. Not happy at all. So I ended up having the surgery May 3rd. They removed the infected plates and mesh, so now there's a soft spot at the back of my head. They tell me that I have a soft spot and that I'll have a new plate put back in after 6 weeks when I'm off the infection medication. So, because I had surgery in the afternoon, they wanted me to wait another day for safety reasons and then go home the next day. I totally understand that, right? So, I'm waiting for a medication and being told they can't figure out a good one, so I have to wait another day and another day and another day. I was there for 5 days. I didn't get to leave until May 6th. It was terrible. And because of COVID, they wouldn't even let me shower. They just gave me, bath wipes to wipe myself off with, but it was disgusting. My hair was just nasty. Ugh. A nurse ended up offering to give me some magazines since I was staying longer than planned, but I was like, no, I'd rather sleep. I'll heal and pass the time that way. But, in all honesty, ew. Germs, gross. Ugh. I'm already staying in the hospital that has the most COVID cases in my state. I don't need any more germs. I ended up having a tube draining the excess blood attached to the back of my head. That was removed a couple days in. I don't know who it was, a nurse or a doctor, but somebody came into my room and removed it, put in a couple stitches, and she was actually surprised at how I wasn't in pain or anything, but, I don't know if it was because my head was numb or anything, but I barely could feel it. Really, both hospital stays weren't that bad. I had nurses checking in on me frequently. My parents were on the phone and stayed updated frequently. If I needed a nurse, I just pressed the call light. Totally cool. It wasn't that bad. It was just more nerve-wracking going in for both surgeries than actually having the surgeries. I ended up having a PICC line in my arm for the medication. I still have the scar. I think it's that one. Yeah, you can't really see it, but it's there. So I needed it for medication to go into my body, and I needed to be attached to it 24/7 for 6 weeks. Luckily, my parents were allowed to go into the medication center they made me go to because they had to learn how to give it to me. I also had a home health aide once a week to change my bandage. So as soon as I could go home, I took a shower right away because it was just, I just felt disgusting. The day after I came home, I actually got a call saying that they wanted to give me a different and better medication. It would still go through my PICC line, but this one would only be for 1 hour a day. So it didn't need to be attached to me for that long. So, I have the medication for less than 3 weeks. And so, side story here. My mom has tracheal subglossic stenosis, meaning that her trachea and windpipe closes on her, and she could suffocate to death if she doesn't have surgery. Your trachea is supposed to be that big around, hers ends up going to be that big around. It's not good. She could suffocate to death, literally. So, I have the medication for less than 3 weeks. My mom has surgery on Tuesday. It's Thursday now. She hooks me up to it. I walk from the kitchen to the living room, turn on the TV. It's like 8 steps, not too far. So I turn on the TV and I start saying, I don't feel good. I really do not feel good at all. I started seeing stars. My vision started going black. I got really hot. I got a massive headache. I turned beet red. And, my mom isn't supposed to talk yet. And she starts yelling at me to sit down. And then she quickly stops medicine. Then she calls my dad to get home so that he can call the medicine center. I slowly started to feel better after she stopped it. But it took almost 2 hours before I felt okay again. My dad calls the place. But I can't get a different medication until the next day, so I went without medication at all that day. My home health aide had to come the next day and remove my PICC line. I cannot watch her have removed it, but, I wanted to see it after it came out, and it was insanely long. My goodness. So they put me on 2 different pills. I had to take both twice a day, 4 pills a day total. They warned me that the pills can cause me to get sunburned very, very easily, so I ended up having to wear long sleeves and long pants everywhere I went. Wouldn't even sit outside. I was so hot. And, my mom's car, the air conditioning was broken. It was, May, June, and we had to drive about an hour and a half to get to my visual therapy appointments. Oh my gosh, I was hot. It was terrible. But the pills also caused my urine to be this gross reddish orange color. But I was cool because the infection cleared up and I was free to live the rest of the summer in the sun. Woo woo. So I ended up having my post-op appointment while I was still on medication, and my mom wasn't allowed to come in for it. So I asked the physician assistant if I could call her and put her on speaker, since I was not going to remember everything, so she lets me. And I asked her about when I'm having another surgery to put a plate back in, because I'm thinking, they told me I'm going to have another surgery, so I'm just curious. And she said that there's nothing saying that I needed another one unless I feel like I need one. So I'm confused, but I'm also really glad I don't need another surgery, but I'm also scared that there's no protection at the back of my head. Anyway, so now it's been about a little over a year and a half later since the stroke happened and everything. And I've been living with a soft spot now for almost a year and a half. I'm really just worried about it getting hit, because I could die, actually die or be brain dead there if I get hit hard enough or anything. When I'm at work, I have to be under tables and counters sometimes, or on a step stool sometimes, and I'm super, super cautious about it. It's kind of scary, but you can't really live in fear. That's just what I've learned this whole time. But anyway, thank you for listening to my story, and I hope that it helps somebody going through the same thing.